There's a specific kind of ache that hits at the strangest moments. You're watching a film and a particular kind of light comes through a window, late afternoon, golden and faintly amber, and something inside you lurches. Not nostalgia exactly, not sadness, something older and harder to name. A longing so precise it almost has a shape, pointed at something you can't locate. Or you're listening to a song, and somewhere in the second chorus you feel like you're about to remember something. Something important, something that used to be yours. And then it doesn't come. The memory doesn't surface, because there is no memory. There's only the feeling, vast and inexplicable, of missing a place you've never actually been. If that sounds familiar, stay with me for a few minutes. Because what you've just described isn't a glitch. It isn't a symptom of something wrong with you. It has a name. It has a neuroscience, and understanding it changes the way you see yourself. The Welsh have a word, Hiraeth. There's no direct English equivalent, which is itself telling. The closest approximation linguists have managed is a longing for a home you cannot return to, or that never was. The Portuguese have saudade, a bittersweet ache for something absent, something beloved, something possibly imaginary. The Romanians have dor. The Japanese have mono no aware, the pathos of things, a sensitivity to impermanence that is also, somehow, beautiful. Every culture that has spent enough time paying attention to the interior life of human beings has arrived at some version of the same feeling. They all built a word for it because they had to, because people kept experiencing something the ordinary vocabulary of emotion couldn't quite hold. And the striking thing is what these words have in common. None of them describe grief exactly, and none of them describe homesickness in the ordinary sense, the kind you feel when you're away from a specific place you know and love. They're all pointing at something more elusive, a longing aimed at something that can't be retrieved, because it may never have existed in the first place. Psychologists have a term for this too, though it's less poetic. Exophoria, a reaching outward towards something undefined. And the question researchers have spent years trying to answer is where it comes from. What is the brain actually doing when it generates this feeling? Because it is generating it. This isn't a spiritual phenomenon, it's a cognitive one. And the explanation is stranger and more interesting than most people expect. In the early 2000s, the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio was studying what happens in the brain when people experience strong emotional memories. Not memories of events, but memories of states. Feelings with no clear narrative attached to them, just the texture of a moment. A kind of knowing without a story. What he found was that the brain stores emotional experiences in a fundamentally different way from factual ones. Factual memory is episodic. You remember what happened. Emotional memory is somatic. Your body remembers how something felt. And crucially, these two systems don't always sync. You can carry the feeling of an experience long after the memory of it has faded. Sometimes you can carry feelings you can't trace to any experience at all. This is because the hippocampus, the region responsible for forming explicit memories, isn't fully functional in human beings until around age 3, which means the first years of your life, arguably the most emotionally formative ones, the years when your nervous system was learning what safety felt like, what warmth and belonging felt like, left no retrievable memories, no stories, no episodic record. But they left something. The feeling itself stayed, encoded in the body, stored in the limbic system, available for retrieval, just not by conscious thought, by sensation, by light through a window, by a particular chord in the song, by something that rhymes emotionally with something you felt when you were too young to remember feeling it. This is one of the most compelling explanations for why people feel homesick for places that don't exist. They're not missing a place. They're missing a state, a felt sense of wholeness or safety or aliveness that they experienced at some point, perhaps very early, perhaps very briefly, and have been trying, without knowing they were trying, to find again ever since. The longing is real. The object of the longing just doesn't have a physical address. Now, here's where it gets a little more personal, because what I've described so far applies pretty broadly. But the people who feel this most intensely, the ones for whom it isn't an occasional flutter, but something closer to a low hum that never fully goes quiet, tend to share something else. They have very active inner lives, not just imagination in the creative sense, though often that too, more a tendency to live partly inside a version of reality that's richer and more emotionally coherent than the one in front of them. They're the people who feel films more than other people do, who get genuinely wrecked by the right piece of music, who experience beauty as almost unbearable sometimes, too much, pressing in too close. Psychologists call this quality absorption. It's a stable personality trait, distinct from introversion, distinct from sensitivity, though it often travels with both. People high in absorption become genuinely immersed in internal experience. They don't just think, they inhabit. And for these people, the ache for the place that doesn't exist isn't background noise. It's closer to a compass, a persistent signal pointing towards something their conscious life keeps failing to provide. What that something is varies. For some people, it's a particular quality of presence, the feeling of being fully here, fully themselves, without the static of self-consciousness. For others, it's connection, the specific warmth of being known by another person without having to explain yourself. For others, it's meaning, the sense that what they're doing and who they are actually matters, not abstractly, but in the body, the way a resonant note makes your chest vibrate. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. But she also wrote something that gets quoted far less often. She said, "The soul knows what it needs. It just expresses that knowledge indirectly, through longing, through dreams, through the inexplicable pull toward certain people or landscapes or moments that seem to promise something they can't quite name." The feeling of missing a place that doesn't exist might be your soul, in Weil's sense, being unusually articulate about what it needs. The imprecision isn't a failure of language. It's the accuracy of a feeling pointing at something that hasn't been built yet. I want to be honest with you here, because I think this video would be doing you a disservice if I skipped this part. For some people, this longing becomes a way of staying permanently next to life, rather than fully in it. The place that doesn't exist is, by definition, unreachable, which means it can become a very comfortable place to put your hope. Nothing in the actual world can compete with the ideal of the thing you carry inside you. Real connection is messy and requires risk. Real meaning is intermittent and sometimes looks a lot like boredom. Real presence is hard when you're a person whose mind generates such vivid internal weather. If you've ever found yourself more at home in a certain kind of daydream than in the actual moments of your day, more at ease in the anticipation of a thing than in the thing itself, you might recognize what I'm describing. The longing becomes the destination. The ache becomes the place you live. That isn't growth. It's a very sophisticated form of avoidance, and it's the kind that's hard to spot because it feels so much like depth. The question worth sitting with isn't, where is this place I'm longing for? It's this. What specific thing does the feeling in that imagined place give me that I'm not letting myself pursue in this one? That's a harder question. It usually requires an uncomfortable answer. The research on this, and there is research, particularly the work of Constantine Sedikides at the University of Southampton, who spent 2 decades studying nostalgia in all its forms, suggests something counterintuitive. People who let themselves feel this kind of longing, rather than suppressing it or intellectualizing it away, tend to have a stronger sense of meaning in their lives, not a weaker one. Sedikides found that nostalgia, even nostalgia for something imaginary, tends to generate what he calls social connectedness, a felt sense of being part of something larger than yourself. It works like an emotional anchor. It reminds people that they're the kind of being for whom things matter, deeply, in ways that exceed what can be seen or measured. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. The practice isn't to find the place. The practice is to take what the longing is teaching you about yourself, about the quality of experience you most need, about the specific texture of aliveness you're reaching toward, and to build small versions of it in the life you actually have. Not as a substitute for the feeling, but as a response to it, as a way of saying, I hear you, I'm going to try. It might be a conversation where you stop performing and just say what you actually mean. It might be 15 minutes somewhere that makes your nervous system go quiet. It might be making something, anything, that brings the inner world and the outer world a little closer together. The longing isn't asking you to find the place. It's asking you to build it. If you watched this whole video and felt that particular kind of quiet recognition, not, oh, that's interesting, but something more like a held breath, a yes you didn't say out loud. I just want to say this. You're not missing something everyone else has managed to find. You're someone whose interior life is unusually precise about what it needs. That isn't a problem to fix. It's information. And information, if you know how to use it, is always worth having.